My name is Isabelle Lees, and I am 35 years old. The night I told my parents I was marrying a broke single father, my mother looked at his 6-year-old daughter sitting at our table and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "We are not taking on extra baggage." Then she gave me a choice: walk out with her, or never come home again. I stayed. For 9 years, they returned every birthday card that little girl mailed them, stamped return to sender. They told the entire family I had abandoned my dying father for a man who cut trees and fixed roofs. I carried that guilt like a second spine. Then my husband's company went public. On paper, we were worth $44 million. 9 days later, my mother and my sister arrived with a typed list of demands. My husband read it once, very slowly, and smiled. They had no idea the exact sentence they wrote to shame me had just handed us the one thing that would tear their entire story apart. Before we go further, if you're new here, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. To understand why my mother could look at a child and call her cargo, you have to understand the house I grew up in. We were not poor. That was the first thing my mother wanted anyone to know. We had the good street, the good church, the family cabin up in the foothills that my grandfather built with his own hands. In our house, love was not a given. It was a wage. You earned it by Sunday and you could lose it by Monday. And my mother kept the books. My sister Tessa was 3 years older and permanently in credit. She was the one they photographed. On the mantel, there were 2 framed pictures side by side, and in both of them, Tessa was in the center laughing, and I was somewhere near the edge, half turned away, as if I already knew where I belonged. My parents were proud of Tessa the way people are proud of a good investment. They talked about her prospects. When she got engaged, my mother cried at the announcement. When Tessa's marriage quietly came apart a few years later, no one talked about it at all, which was its own kind of proof about how our family handled a truth that didn't flatter it. My father, Roland, loved me quietly. I want to be fair to him, even now. He never once raised his voice at me. He also never once stood in front of me. When my mother decided something, he had a habit of folding his napkin into a small, perfect square and studying it like it required all his attention. I learned to read that square. It meant he agreed with her, or that he was too tired to disagree, which in our house amounted to the same thing. My mother, Patrice, cared about what things look like from the outside. She did not ask whether a person was kind. She asked what they did and who their people were. The cabin was part of that. It was the proof that the Lees family had always been solid, always had somewhere to go, always had something to leave behind. She talked about that cabin the way other people talk about a title, and I grew up understanding that a place could matter more than a person if the place made you look right. I became the child who kept records. I think it started as self-defense. In a house where the story could be rewritten depending on who my mother needed to punish that week, I learned to hold on to what actually happened. I kept cards. I kept notes. I kept the little slips that proved who had said what. Later, it became my job. I worked in the records department of a regional insurance office, processing claims, matching what people said they were owed against what they had actually signed their name to. I spent my days proving what people had really agreed to. I never imagined I would one day have to do it to my own mother. I met Warren on a Tuesday, in the rain, at the front counter of that office. He came in to fight a non-renewal. His landlord's coverage on the little rental he lived in was being pulled, and it threatened his lease. And he had driven across town on his lunch break to ask a question that most people were too proud to ask. He was not too proud. He set his weathered folder on the counter and said, "I'm not asking for a break. I'm asking you to read what I actually paid for." He had sawdust on his forearms and a patience in his voice that did not match how tired he looked. And behind him, in one of the plastic chairs by the window, a small girl sat with a box of crayons and a coloring book, drawing something with total concentration. Her name was Junie. She was 5. While I pulled up her father's policy, she held up her page and showed me, without being asked. She had drawn a row of trees. One of them was colored red instead of green. "That one's sick," she told me matter of fact. "The red ones are the ones you have to watch." I did not know it then, but I had just been handed the whole shape of my future in a child's crayon drawing. I only smiled and told her it was a very good tree, and she nodded like a professional receiving a fair review. Warren Kessler was not a project. I want to be clear about that, because the way the story got told later, you would think I ran off with some doomed romantic dream. He was a tired man with a kid and a truck older than she was. He trimmed trees and cleared brush, and did the dangerous, unglamorous work of cutting back the vegetation that turns a house into kindling when the hills go up. He had debts. He had a temper he kept on a short leash, and apologized for the 2 times it slipped. He told me on our 3rd real conversation, "I'm not a good bet, Isabelle." He said it like a warning he owed me. That honesty was the thing. I had grown up around people who never admitted a limitation in their lives, and here was a man laying his out on the table so I could decide with my eyes open. Junie's mother had left when Junie was a baby. Warren never badmouthed her. He just said she wasn't built to stay, and that he had decided a long time ago that Junie would never once feel like the reason for it. I fell for the father first. I fell for the daughter more slowly, and it was harder because she made me earn it. Junie had a private test she ran on adults. When I came by, she would find a window and check whether my car was still in the lot. She didn't ask if I would stay. She watched to see if I would. So I stopped promising and started showing up, over and over, until one day I noticed she had stopped going to the window. When I finally brought them to meet my family, I told myself my parents would at least be civil. I had waited months. I had delayed the introduction because some part of me already knew, but I convinced myself that if they just met him, if they just saw Junie, the warmth would win. We sat at my parents' dining table. My mother asked Warren 3 questions about his work, and made each one sound like a diagnosis. My father folded his napkin. Tessa watched me over her wine glass with an expression I couldn't place then and understand completely now. And Junie, 6 years old that spring, sat very still and tried to use the right fork. I waited until dessert to say we were getting married. My mother did not look at me. She looked at Junie, and then she said it, not to the child, but over her head, as if Junie were a piece of furniture being discussed for the room. "We are not taking on extra baggage, Isabelle." Junie stopped chewing. She was 6, not stupid. She did not know the exact meaning of the word, but she knew the temperature of it. She knew she had just been weighed and set aside. Later, in the kitchen, my mother gave me the choice plainly: him and his baggage, or your family. And then she reached for the weapon she would use for the next 9 years. "And think about your father," she said. "In his condition. You'd really do this to him now?" That was the first time I heard the phrase, "your father's condition." I didn't know yet that a phrase could be a leash. I stayed. I walked out of that house with Warren and Junie, and I did not go home again. We married that summer in Faye Coleman's backyard. Faye was our neighbor, a widow in her 70s who had decided, without asking anyone's permission, to adopt the 3 of us. She lent us a lace tablecloth she called her only inheritance. There were maybe 12 people there. Hollis Ward, Warren's friend who would later help build everything, showed up with a folding table and a cooler and stayed until midnight, fixing the string lights that kept shorting out. Warren wore a borrowed jacket, and Junie threw flower petals with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. Before the wedding, Warren said something I have never forgotten. "If your mother ever knocks, we open the door. I'm not going to be the reason you lost them." He meant it. For 9 years, he kept that door unlocked, even when I wanted to nail it shut. So I mailed my parents an invitation. I told myself I was giving them a chance. It came back 2 weeks later, unopened, my name crossed out in my mother's handwriting, stamped, return to sender. No note. That was the message. I was not worth the paper cut of opening the envelope. I kept it anyway. Old habit. I slid it into a file drawer and tried not to think about what it meant. Then the phone calls started, and they were not for me. My aunt called, her voice low and wounded, and asked how I could do this to my father, when he's like this. A cousin sent a message about praying for my dad and hoping I could live with my choices. I sat with the phone in my hand and realized my mother had already buried me in a story, and the story was that I had abandoned a dying man to run off with a laborer. I believed it. That's the part that still catches in my throat. I was cut off, with no way to see my father, no way to check, and so the guilt did exactly what it was designed to do. Why would a mother lie about her own husband dying? It was too monstrous to invent. So I carried it. Junie carried something too. A few weeks after the wedding, she asked me, very quietly, at the edge of her bed, did they leave because of me? I did not give her a speech. She was 6. Speeches are for the person giving them. Instead, I said, they left because of who they are. You are the reason I stayed. Then I did the thing that actually mattered. The next morning, I registered as her emergency contact at school. I wrote my name on her lunchbox in permanent marker. Junie's, call Isabelle. She read it at breakfast and didn't say anything, but she carried that lunchbox like it was proof of something. That night, she drew her first map. Our street, every house, every tree, the safe ones in green and the ones to watch in red. This is our map, she said, so we know who to keep safe. I put it on the refrigerator. I had no idea it would end up being the most important object in my life. The first years were lean in the specific grinding way that doesn't make good stories. 2 jobs between us. A rental with a water heater that failed every winter. Warren left before dawn and came home smelling like sawdust and smoke. And I kept the books and worked part-time and learned how to make a small amount of money cover a slightly larger amount of life. He brought the calluses. I brought the paperwork. Neither of us could have done it alone. And I want to say that plainly, because later people tried to tell the story as though I had quietly bankrolled a great man. I didn't. We were 2 people carrying one house from opposite ends. There was one night that first winter that told me who we were going to be. Junie spiked a fever at 2 in the morning, the kind that makes a small body burn like a coal, and Warren was 3 counties away on an emergency clearing job he could not leave without losing the contract that was keeping our lights on. It was just me, and at the same time my phone was lighting up with a work crisis of my own, a batch of claims that had to be reconciled before an early audit, the kind of thing that gets a person noticed or fired. I looked at the phone, and I looked at the child shivering under 2 blankets, and it wasn't actually a hard choice, which is how I learned it had never been a choice at all. I turned the phone face down. I sat on the floor by her bed with a cool cloth and a bowl of water until the fever broke near dawn. I lost some standing at work over the missed deadline. Junie, half asleep, said, "You stayed the whole time," like she was confirming a hypothesis. She was. She'd been testing me since the day we met. And that night, the results came in. Then the fires came. The summer of 2018 was the one that changed everything, though not in a way anyone would have called lucky at the time. Warren spent that season clearing burned lots and cutting back the vegetation that insurance companies had started to panic about. And somewhere in the ash, he saw the thing that no one was measuring. They insure the house, he told me one night, exhausted. But nobody measures the fire. Nobody scores the risk before it's a claim. He said it like a complaint. It turned out to be a company. He and Hollis built a rough tool that scored the defensible space around a property. How close the trees came to the roof, how dry the slope was, how fast a fire would find the walls. Warren sketched the first version on the back of a hardware store receipt. I filed that receipt in a folder, because that is what I do. The first person who ever paid them was a regional insurance adjuster who took one look and wanted more. Around that time, Junie, 8 years old now, drew a bigger map. The whole neighborhood this time, done in her serious way, green and red, houses she had decided were safe, and houses she had decided needed watching. She handed it to me like a report. "It's our map," she said again, as if I might have forgotten the mission. "There is one more thing from that year I have to tell you, because it matters later." One evening, I was going through an old box and I pulled out a photograph of the family cabin, the one from my childhood. Junie studied it the way her father studied a job site. "That's a danger house," she said. She pointed at the pines crowding the roofline. "All those trees are touching. You'd have to cut all of that." She was 8, and she was right. And I laughed and put the photo away and thought nothing more of it. Remember that. Remember, she said it years before it meant anything. Nothing about the company was smooth. In 2020, a pilot contract with a utility fell apart at the last minute. A change in leadership over there, a budget that evaporated, months of Warren's work written off in a single phone call. The money ran out. Warren sat at our kitchen table one night and said, maybe it was time to go back to just cutting trees, that maybe he'd been foolish to think a man like him got to build something. I didn't save the company. I want to be honest about my role. I just refused to let it drown on a Tuesday. I sat down with the numbers, found where we were bleeding, and cut it off. I called the 2 clients we had and restructured their terms so we'd survive the quarter. I kept the boat floating for 1 more month. And in that month, a large insurer called back, because another fire season had made them desperate for exactly the thing Warren had built. The family missed all of it. There was a night that year when Junie had a small performance at school, a recital, nothing enormous, and I saved a seat for my father. I still don't fully know why. Hope is stubborn and stupid. The seat stayed empty. Faye sat in it instead and clapped twice as loud as anyone, and afterward Junie ran to her, not to the empty chair, and I understood something about who my family actually was. That was the year, too, that I learned what a chosen family actually is, because we started building holidays around one. Thanksgiving was Faye's dry turkey and Hollis burning the rolls and Junie in charge of the one dish nobody could ruin. It was loud and imperfect, and nobody kept a ledger. I would sit at that table sometimes and feel a phantom ache for the family I'd been cut from, and then Junie would say something impossible, and Faye would laugh, her whole body laugh, and the ache would lose its grip for a while. For 9 years, the exclusions came on a schedule. Every holiday, I knocked. I'm not proud of how long I kept knocking. Every holiday, the answer was the same silence, mailed back to me. Blocked numbers. Messages passed through relatives asking me not to upset my father. Cards returned. There is a stack of them, held together with a rubber band, that got thicker every year, and every card in it was addressed in a child's handwriting. The worst one was the funeral. My grandmother died when Junie was 10, and I found out 3 days after the service, from a cousin who assumed I'd been told. I hadn't been. My mother had simply left me off the list, the way you'd leave a name off an invoice. And when I saw the photos later, there was Tessa, sitting in the front row, in the seat that would have been mine, holding the spot in the family that I had been erased from without so much as a phone call. I wasn't grieving a grandmother in that moment so much as grieving the confirmation. To my mother, I was not a person who had been wronged. I was a line item that had been removed. If you've ever had your family treat the person you love like a burden to be discarded, I'd really like to hear it. Drop it in the comments. Not for me. For the next person scrolling by who thinks they're the only one who's ever been made to choose. You're not. And it helps to know it. There was a crack, once, before I was ready to see it. My aunt let something slip on a call. A small, ordinary thing. She mentioned that my father still went fishing every Sunday, same as always. And then she stopped herself. Too late. A dying man does not fish every Sunday. I wrote the date down in my notebook, the way I write everything down, and then I told myself I had misheard, because the alternative was a door I wasn't strong enough to open yet. I filed the note next to the returned envelope and didn't let myself connect them. Junie got older, and one day the word found her. She was around 12. She came to me holding the edge of her old map, and she said, "I know what she called me." I looked it up. Baggage is what you throw away. She did not cry in front of me. She tore a small piece off the corner of the map, the corner where she had written our family. I taped it back that night. Quietly. Not a lecture, just tape. Some things you fix with your hands instead of your mouth. It was a cousin, one of the kinder ones, who told me the thing that reframed my father for me. "He asks about you," she said, "but your mother runs the phone, and she runs the story." I didn't forgive him for that. Being controlled is not the same as being innocent. But I started to separate them in my mind, my quiet father and my mother who needed the lie so badly. And that was the question that began to haunt me. If my father was not the mastermind, then why did my mother need him to be dying? What was the lie actually for? I stopped knocking the year Junie turned 12. Not out of anger, out of self-respect, which took me far too long to locate. I gathered everything into a single tin box. The returned cards, the crossed-out envelope, my dated notes, Junie's taped map, and I put the lid on it and set it on a high shelf. I thought I was closing something. I was really just saving it for the right day. Meanwhile, Ironwood grew, one rung at a time. The 2021 fire season made the insurers need what Warren had. A round of funding came, $9 million, and the company went from a truck and a laptop to 30 people and an actual office. Warren still showed up to job sites smelling like sawdust because he never trusted a risk score he hadn't stood underneath. My first business card had a title on it that made me laugh out loud when it printed, Head of Operations. I built the systems, kept the contracts, tracked every document with a timestamp and a permission log, because that is the only way I know how to keep a company honest. He built what kept houses safe. I built what kept the company clean. Every file, who touched it, and when. Junie, now a teenager, became a real person with opinions and moods, and a way of arguing that could strip paint. She was not our little mascot. She slammed doors and apologized and asked hard questions and kept her old map on her bedroom wall like other kids keep a poster. "You still have that?" I asked her once. "It's our map," she said, as if the answer were obvious and I was slow. By 2022, the company had raised a larger round, $28 million, and it employed nearly 100 people. By 2023, there was a contract with a utility that had once turned Warren down, and Warren took the meeting himself, in a clean shirt, and did not gloat, which I loved him for. And somewhere in all of that, the family that had returned a child's birthday cards for years began, very quietly, to notice that we existed. The first sign was small. Tessa texted me. After years of nothing, she wrote, "I've missed you." 3 messages later, she was asking, in a voice trying very hard to sound casual, how much of the company we actually owned. That was the shape of it from the start. The warmth arrived first. Always 3 or 4 messages ahead of the real question, so that the real question could pretend to be an afterthought. She asked about our house. She asked what Warren's stake was. She wanted to know, she said, just so she could brag about her little sister. And every single one of her friendly reach-outs landed within days of some piece of financial news about Ironwood becoming public. I want to tell you I saw it clearly right away. I didn't, because there was a text buried in my phone from 3 years earlier that I had never deleted. And when I finally went back and read it in sequence, my stomach turned over. Tessa had reached out once before, years ago, All warmth and nostalgia, an olive branch that had made me cry in a parking lot with relief. And then, 4 messages in, she had asked me to co-sign something, to help with a temporary situation with her business. The warmth had been the wrapper, the ask had been the gift. I had said no, gently, and she had gone cold and silent for 3 more years. I had kept that text the way I keep everything, and now here was the new one, and when I laid them side by side, they were nearly the same message. Same opening. Same childhood memory. Same pivot. My sister had a script, and she was running it on me again. "Honey," Faye said when I showed her in her flat, kind way, "they don't want you back. They want a return on you." She told me to write down every contact and its date, and I did. Then 2 things arrived in the same month, and I could not unsee either of them. The first was a letter, forwarded to me by a relative who thought I should know. It was a non-renewal notice from an insurer for the family cabin. The reason was printed right there: high wildfire exposure, undefended slope, declining value. The cabin. The one thing my mother treasured as proof of the family's standing, the property they had made sure was cut cleanly out of any inheritance that might touch me, was now a liability that nobody would insure. And in that moment, I remembered an 8-year-old pointing at a photograph and saying, "That's a danger house. You'd have to cut all of that." The second thing was a photo. My kind cousin sent it without much comment. It showed my father at a lake, holding up a fish, laughing, his color good, his shoulders square. The date on it was recent. My dying father, the one I had grieved in advance for 9 years, was standing in the sun with a trout and a grin. 9 years of guilt cracked down the middle in a single frame. I did not explode. I want you to understand the discipline that took, because I am not a saint. I am just a person who learned very young that the calm hand keeps the receipts. I sat with that photograph, and I felt the leash slip off my neck, and underneath the anger, a colder question rose up. If he was fine, then the lie was never about protecting him. It was about controlling me. And a lie that patient, that long, is not built for nothing. It is built for a payoff. Around then, Warren brought in a lawyer named Gwen Marsh, mostly to make sure the company's structure was clean ahead of what was coming. But I told Gwen the family story. All of it. Because I had learned that lawyers are just professional keepers of receipts, and I recognized a colleague. She listened, and at the end she said something I didn't fully understand until much later. "Here's the problem with people like your mother," she said. "Everyone can feel that she lied. Feeling isn't proof. What you'd need is her. In writing, wanting something in exchange for the lie. You don't have that yet." She tapped the table. "You don't need a courtroom. You need them to put it in writing. And people who do this always do. Eventually. When they finally want something, they write it down." On her notepad, she wrote 3 words and underlined them. "Wait for the list." I also learned that season that Tessa's life was not the polished thing our family advertised. A relative let it slip that the golden child was in real trouble. A business gone bad, debts she was hiding, a marriage that had ended without an announcement. It landed strangely on me. I had spent my whole life being measured against Tessa and found short. Now I understood that the yardstick itself had been hollow the whole time. And I understood, too, that a family with a favorite in freefall would eventually come looking for a net. In March of 2026, Ironwood went public. I'm not going to pretend I understand every part of it, and I'm not going to bore you with the machinery, because the machinery is not the point. The company was valued at around $220 million. Our household's shares came to roughly a fifth of that. The headline number, the one that would end up in a text my mother sent to relatives, was $44 million. What the headline did not say is that the number lived entirely on paper. Our shares were locked for 180 days. We could not sell them, could not borrow easily against them, could not turn them into a house or a check or a rescue. What we actually had in the bank could barely have fixed the cabin roof. $44 million, the headline said. I was standing in a kitchen with a mortgage, reading it on my phone. The family, when they came, would only ever see the headline. They never once read the part that said on paper. 9 days after the news broke, my mother called. 9 days. I noted it, the way I note everything. Her voice came through warm and smooth, as if we had simply lost touch, as if a distance had opened up on its own like weather. Isabelle, sweetheart, she said, it's been too long. Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. Just too long, as though time were the thing that had crossed me out of that envelope, and not her hand. She wanted to come by, to reconnect. This weekend, if that worked. Tessa texted within the hour, layering on the intimacy, dredging up childhood summers, our old inside jokes, the cabin again, and woven through the nostalgia, the real thread. Have you two thought about what family is owed? It was, almost word for word, the opening of the script I had read twice before. There it was. What family is owed? If you've ever had people vanish from your life and then reappear the exact week your situation improved, you already know the specific flavor of that phone call. Tell me I'm not the only one. Put a single word in the comments if someone came back for you only after you had something worth coming back for. I think a lot of us are quieter about that than we should be. Warren and I talked it through at the kitchen table that night. The same table where the numbers had once made him think about quitting. We decided to open the door one time. Listen. Not argue. Let them talk. People show you everything, Warren said, when they think they've already won. We agreed on our limits before they arrived, the way you agree on a plan before you walk into weather. We rehearsed the one word we might need to say, so it wouldn't stick in my throat when the moment came. And we agreed on one thing without any discussion at all. Junie would not be in the room. She was 15, and this was not a wound we were going to reopen in front of her. She went to Faye's for the evening. Before I left the house, I took the tin box down from its high shelf and set it on the counter, closed, within reach. Just in case. They came on a Saturday. My mother arrived in her good coat, my sister half a step behind her, and in my mother's hands was a folder. I noticed the folder before I noticed anything else, because I noticed things. It was not fresh. The corners were soft with handling. The margins were dense with my mother's handwriting. Whatever was inside it had existed for a long time, had been revised and refined and carried around, waiting. This was not the spontaneous overture of a mother who missed her daughter. This had been ready before the IPO ever happened. We sat in the living room. Warren offered coffee. My mother looked around at our house, and I watched her do the math on it, pricing the furniture, appraising the life. Then she folded her hands on top of the worn folder and said, in her gentlest voice, "We think it's time to heal this family, but healing means being fair about what everyone has sacrificed." She slid the folder across the table. $2.5 million, she read aloud, as if it were a reasonable place to begin, for everything we invested in you, your upbringing, your education. It's only fair. She went on. The company was to assess and remediate the cabin, professionally, at our expense, because after all this was expertise we now had in the family. There was to be a position for Tessa, given her connections in the industry, which was the first I'd heard of my sister having any. There was $8,000 a month for my father's ongoing medical care. And there was a final item, the one that made my hands go still. A public statement, to be shared with the whole family, that I had come home, that I had returned to the people who raised me. Warren picked up the folder. He read it, unhurried, his eyes moving down the page and then back up to one line, and then a small smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was not cruel. I have to be careful describing it because it wasn't a villain's smile and it wasn't triumph. It was the specific expression of a man who has just watched someone hand him the exact thing he could not have gotten on his own. "Perfect," he said quietly. He set the page down. "You just put it in writing. Now my lawyer has proof." My mother's face changed. For a moment she stopped breathing, one held beat, and then she reached for the folder as if she could pull the words back into it. Tessa looked between us, not understanding yet, the way I did not fully understand yet either. But I had seen my mother's face, and I trusted my mother's face more than I trusted my own confusion. Warren did not explain in the language of law. He explained it the way you explain something to family. "You've spent 9 years telling everyone she abandoned a dying man," he said. "And you just handed me a bill for his medical care. $8,000 a month." He tapped the line. "For a man I have a photograph of, from last month, holding a fish." That was the first crack, and my mother heard it split. But she was not going to sit and let herself be read to. She straightened. "That's private," she said. "You don't understand our family." "I understand it now," I said. I opened the tin box. "I want to tell you that I planned every word, but I didn't. I only knew the order things had to come out, because I had been keeping them in that order for years. I took out the photograph first and laid it on the folder, right on top of the line about my father's care. "He's fine, Mom. He's been fine. You froze him at his worst moment and you've been charging me interest on it for 9 years. She started to say something about his heart, about the scare, and I let her, because it was almost the truth. So I finished it for her. "He had a real event, in 2017, right when you cut me off. A stent, a few frightening weeks, and then he recovered. Completely. And you never once corrected the story, because a recovered father is no use to you. A dying father is a leash. You kept him dying in the telling because it kept me guilty and it kept everyone else angry at me." Tessa jumped in then, and this is the part where I understood she had her own angle. She did not defend the story. She pivoted to fairness, to family, to how hard it had been for everyone. And in doing it, she said the thing that let the whole design show through. "You have $44 million, Isabelle. It wouldn't hurt you to help. It never even occurred to you that we might actually need it. Need. Not deserve. Need." My sister, the family's crown jewel, said need. And I finally saw the machine underneath the reconciliation. I took out my phone. I found the old text, the one from 3 years ago, and I found the new one, and I read them out loud, back to back. The same opening, the same childhood memory, the same pivot to money. "You have a script," I said. "You ran it on me 3 years ago to co-sign your way out of a hole, and you're running it again. This was never a mother missing a daughter. It's a rescue. For her." I looked at my mother. "Same as always. You just needed me big enough to fund it this time." Tessa's silence was the loudest thing in the room. Then I pointed at the demand for the public statement, the one where I was supposed to announce that I had returned to the family. "You can't have it both ways," I said. "For 9 years I'm the ungrateful daughter who walked out. Now you want me to pay you back for raising me, and you want me to stand in front of everyone and say I came home. Pick a story. You put both of them on the same page in your own handwriting. A lawyer only needs the page." My mother's mouth opened and closed. She reached one more time for the version of events she had lived inside for a decade. "We only ever wanted what was best." "Then where were you?" I said. "When she cried because she thought she was the reason I lost my family?" And I put down the cards. I set the whole rubber-banded stack of them on the table, 9 years of a child's birthday cards, everyone addressed in Junie's handwriting, everyone stamped "Return to Sender." I didn't say anything for a moment. I let them look at the pile. Then I said, "This is what you sent back. Every year. You couldn't even open them. She's the baggage you refused to unwrap." The room was quiet in a way that had nothing to do with drama. Even Tessa had nothing. My mother looked at the cards and, for the first time in my life, I watched her come right up to the edge of the truth. Something in her face gave way. Just slightly. The way a face does when a person is about to say, "I'm sorry," and means it. Then the door opened. My father walked in, on his own 2 feet, steady, his color good, exactly as he'd looked in the photograph. My mother had left him in the car. I understood that instantly. She'd brought him along as a prop, the frail old man waiting outside to make her case for her, and she had never intended for him to come in and be seen. But he had gotten out of the car. He had walked to the door on his own. After 9 years of folding his napkin into a perfect square, my father had finally decided not to sit still. He looked at the cards on the table. He looked at me. "You told them I was dying," I said to my mother, and my voice did not shake, which surprised me. "You buried me alive to keep him." My father did not fold anything. His hands stayed at his sides, and he said to me, in front of both of them, "She's right. I let it happen." That was all he managed in the moment, but it was more than he had given me in a decade, and it landed like weather breaking. Tessa tried, one last time, to make it about the money, about need, about fairness. My mother tried to gather the folder and her dignity at once, but the thing they had come to do was already dead on the table between the cards and the photograph. There was nothing left to demand. You cannot bill someone for abandoning you while also billing them for raising you. You cannot present a dying man who walks in under his own power. I made the decisions, and I made them out loud, because I had spent my whole life letting other people narrate me, and I was finished with that. There would be no $2.5 million. There would be no rescue dressed as reconciliation. The company would not touch the cabin. The cabin was theirs, and its problems were theirs, and I was done being the family solution to a fire they had planted themselves. The story about me was to stop. Gwen would send a letter making the terms of that plain, and now, thanks to the folder, the letter would have teeth. Not a lawsuit, not a courtroom, just the simple, documented fact that they had known the truth and sold the lie for money, and that it would cost them their standing in the only community my mother had ever cared about if it continued. I took Junie's map out of the tin box, the taped one, the one where an 8-year-old had drawn our whole neighborhood in green and red, and I laid it over the folder, right across the line that demanded we remediate the cabin. "She mapped what was worth keeping safe when she was 8, I said. "You should have made her list. You didn't. So you don't get to be on mine." My mother stood, reaching for the last word, the way she always did. My father, quietly, sat down, on my side of the room. There was no trial. There didn't need to be. The story my mother had spent 9 years telling died in one afternoon, because the people she had told it to started hearing the other version, the one with a photograph and a stack of returned cards attached to it. Her standing in the church, in the family, in the small world she had spent her whole life curating, did not survive the details. Tessa's situation was hers to manage. Without our money, the rescue simply didn't happen, and I made my peace with not being responsible for that. Gwen's letter went out. A response came back agreeing to every term. It was the shortest, most honest communication I ever received from my family. A few days later, my aunt called. This time to apologize. She had believed the story for 9 years, and she said so, and she asked how Junie was. It was small, and it was late, and I took it anyway, because I am trying to be the kind of person who can tell the difference between an apology that costs something and one that doesn't. My father asked to see me alone. We met at a diner halfway between our lives. He did not fold his napkin. His hand stayed flat on the table the entire time, and I noticed, because I notice things, and because it was the first time in my life I had seen him refuse that particular escape. "I let her make you the villain because it was easier than standing up," he said. "That was mine. Not hers. Mine. I had a heart scare and I let her turn it into a weapon, and I watched her return a little girl's cards and I said nothing. There's no version of that I get to blame on your mother. I chose the quiet. I chose it for 9 years. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't mention his age or his health or the years he had left. He didn't ask for money, and he didn't ask to be let back in as though nothing had happened. He just named what he had done, specifically, one item at a time, the way you'd read a list you were finally ready to own. I can forgive you, Dad, I told him. That part's free. Trust is the expensive one, and you'll pay it slowly, and I get to set the price. He nodded like a man who had expected exactly that and considered it fair. We started with a coffee once a month, small, conditional, something either of us could walk away from. A narrow door propped open just wide enough for one person and closed to the two who had never earned their way back through it. The first of those coffees, a month later, he asked if he could meet Junie sometime. Not soon, he said quickly. Whenever she wanted, if she ever wanted, on her terms. I told him that was the right way to ask, and that it would be up to her. And he said, "Of course it is." And I believed him, which was new. I drove home that afternoon, lighter than I had been in 9 years, and Junie was waiting on the porch with the map in her hands. She had heard the outline of it by then, the parts a 15-year-old should hear. She turned the old paper over, looking at her own 8-year-old handwriting. "I looked up baggage again," she said. "A while ago. It means the stuff you carry that you don't want, the stuff you're supposed to leave behind." She handed me the map. "You kept me. For 9 years you kept every dumb card I ever made, so I guess I was never baggage." She shrugged. The way teenagers shrug when they're saying something enormous and don't want you to make it weird. "I was just family. You just had to prove it to everybody the hard way." That night we did the most ordinary thing in the world. We made a bad dinner, all 3 of us in a kitchen too small for it. Warren burning the garlic the way Hollis burns rolls, Junie narrating our failures like a sportscaster. Faye came over for the leftovers she pretended not to want. Nobody kept a ledger. Nobody was owed anything. It was loud and imperfect, and it was, by every measure that has ever mattered, a family at a table. I had the map framed. It hangs by our front door now, green trees and red trees, and a taped corner and a child's careful legend of who was worth keeping safe. The cabin isn't on it. It was never her neighborhood, never her family, just a red house in an old photograph that an 8-year-old saw clearly before any of us did. People ask me sometimes if the money fixed it. It didn't. The money was locked on paper for most of the story, and it never healed a single thing. What fixed it was smaller and harder to sell. It was a man who kept a door unlocked without ever forcing me through it. It was a widow who clapped twice as loud from an empty seat. It was a girl who tested whether I would stay, and then, one day, stopped checking the window. Family is not the people who raised you and kept the receipt. It is not blood, and it is definitely not net worth. Family is who is still in the room when you have nothing to offer, and who is still in it when you suddenly have everything, and they want none of it for themselves. If any part of this reached you, if you are the person right now being told that the people you love are baggage, that your worth is measured in what you can be billed for, I want you to hear the one thing it took me 9 years to learn. You are allowed to close the door. You are allowed to keep it closed to some people and open it a crack for others. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing, and you get to hold the key to both. Share this with someone who needs to hear that today. Subscribe if you want to stay for the next story, because there is always a next one. And there is always someone finally setting down a weight they were never supposed to carry. I'll see you there. Thank you for staying to the end of this one with me.